On September 7, 2008, Maxis released one of the most ambitious games of its time, Spore. The single-player sandbox game was met with a mixture of acclaim and criticism at first after a number of fans were upset it did not meet the expectations set in demos shown during Wright's 2005 DD talk. On the various E3 showings, it would eventually be recognized as a project that pioneered procedural generation that still has an active player base 10 years later. Over the entire course of development, as the team at Maxis grew from an idea in Wright's head to a team of over 100 developers, every designer that touched some aspect of Spore knew it was something incredible, even if the initial concept would have to change and scale over the course of development. The first time I talked to him, he said he wanted this to be a game about Drake's equation, the improbability of our universe. Lead designer Chris Trottier tells me over Skype he wanted players to go through all this deep failure so they appreciate how incredible it is that we are here. He came off that quickly though, but it was clear how massive he wanted it to be early on. 10 years after release, members from all aspects of the Spore project were eager to reflect on the challenges, highlights, and overall experience of developing a game as influential as Spore. What follows is a series of excerpts taken from conversations conducted separately with lead designer Chris Trottier, technical artist Kate Compton, lead designer Librande, software engineer Culyba, lead gameplay engineer Moskowitz, and associate producer Guillaume Pierre. Unfortunately, while Wright remains elusive, Librande working on Spore was wonderful. A lot of industry nowadays is making equals to previous games. So you take an existing game and just add +1 to it. Spore was so different that there was not a lot of models that we had for it. We had this powers of 10 vision from starting from a cell and zooming all the out to a galaxy level. It was really like what? It was not like any game before it. So the whole team was super excited about it. Chris Trottier, Spore was an interesting team, since it was 100 people who were used to being the smartest person in the room, and when you have people who are used to being brilliant, it gets hard for them to say, I am good with doing whatever works for everyone else. We had a lot of passionate personalities that created a culture of debate. It was kind of this competitive team, and people were focused on making whatever they were working on the best, which is great. It's good to have passionate designers, but there was this focus on local excellence over the handshakes that made the game whole. Dan Moskowitz, I had worked at Sony for 5 years. Prior to joining Maxis, I had worked on PlayStation 2 games, and that had been my experience up until that point. I worked at a really cool research lab as an undergrad, and joining Maxis felt like going back to that a little bit. I remember when I first joined, there was an intern whose whole job was to prototype weather patterns, and that was unheard of for an ARM video game company. We had someone working on that interstitial sort of background part of the game, because we wanted the weather to have some kind of real simulation behind it. That feeling of creating creative tools was baked into the culture at Maxis. We were more into things that let you build worlds the way you wanted. Guillaume Pierre, when I first saw the design document back in 2003, I was like, good luck with that. Part of the game was like Pac-Man. Part of it was like Diablo. Another part was like SimCity. I just thought that there was no way that this game was ever going to come out. A blurry photo of the Spore team in 2008, provided by Guillaume Pierre. Kate Compton, was a huge astronomy buff. and the rest of the team had some of the most diverse set of outside interest that I have ever seen in a games team. People did not just play video games for their hobbies and work. We had people into biology and physics. We had anexmers people just came in with a world of ideas. And since this was a game about everything was in scope. So we had a lot of different prototypes floating around, including a very sophisticated particle simulation of oceans to Drake's equation about how life propagates across galaxies. There was just a lot of stuff like that. The gameplay was always the tricky part. You can have a lot of independently interesting situations, but you need to tie them together. Dave Culyba. I had no prior experience before joining Spore, so one of my takeaways was making games is complicated and frequently messy. It's not at all this clearly defined plan that you had. It was a powerful lesson, in that the scope of the game was big as if we had it all figured out. The demo did a great job of presenting this impression of what the game could be, but it barely scratches the surface of what the game needed to be. Figuring all that stuff out, like what makes the different parts fun. Why would you do this versus that? How do these link together? And how do you even manage to make it work in the first place? Another interesting aspect was figuring out the scope of the game in terms of schedule. There was this impression that the game was both an infinity away from being done, and always just about to ship. Innovation with a vision. But what about game design? Pierre, Chris Hacker, and Soren Johnson, who host a podcast together, said something like how Will was more interested in building a game studio and seeing all the different developers interact with each other. Like that was his game. He hired a lot of talented people, based off their personalities and such. He wanted to see how they interacted and came up with a game. Librande. We had a really strong vision, but we did not have strong game design behind the vision. Like what is the player actually doing from a gamer point of view? If you take a look at the creature editor, outside of the rest of the game, it's just wonderful. It makes you smile. Even today, it's such a fun toy and it's easy to see why it's compelling. But once you start thinking about game systems, like what the goal is, how will we make them feel like they're leveling up? What's the skill progression? And things that are traditionally associated with games. A lot of that was just missing. Compton. It was amazing to see procedural generation used for so many things. The skin generation system, all the procedural mesh generation of the characters, the multiplayer layers animation systems, and there were entire procedural music systems. There was so much that we tended to even forgot the music guys were back there in a room working on things. We cross-fertilized. And now that I look back on with the scope of all the tools you can use in procedural content generation, we were using all of them. We were using wildly different algorithms and tools behind the spaceship and the creature generators. I had this idea of having a variation of general stuff. You have some filler, some kind of memorable stuff, and then some hero stuff. Imagine you have a landscape, and you have a lot of fairly identical stuff and maybe some of it is mathematically identical. Like if you have the same 5 types of trees that are just rotated and scaled differently, and then you have a couple of things that draw the eye, things that you will remember. Like a mountain, you have to have a background of different, but not interesting things, and then the super interesting memorable stuff. The uniquely designed Earth planet that Compton created. For example, we had a decent distribution of the generative planets, but you definitely began to see the same ones over and over again. I did put in a couple of Easter eggs, like a cubic planet and a perfect model of Earth that I made from United States GS data. If you saw either they do stand out. Moskowitz, The coolest piece of tech that was in all of Spore was the procedural animation system. That was the system driving the character animation in the editors. It's what let you build a fully rigged creature that had 9 legs, touching the ground, and they would all walk naturally. We worked with the system so as you were building, the creator would react on the play animations, like looking at its own arm, as you put it on a smiling, and making a noise. What you create immediately emotionally responds to you.